So let's read a little bit. And so it came to pass. I sat on the white couch in the fifth floor apartment where I lived. The couch faced north through panoramic windows. Across the street from the building, there was a yard the telephone company used to park service trucks. On the other side of that yard, there was another road. A white truck driving on that road about 1/3 of a mile away caught my attention. The driver had been going east but pulled into the yard across from the building and stopped the truck. The driver climbed down from the cab and paced back and forth next to the truck. I felt drawn toward him. Quite suddenly, I found myself standing next to the African-American man who a moment ago was driving the truck. No words were possible or necessary, for I understood him, and he did not seem to perceive my presence. This man was about 60 years of age. He was hungry, but he only had $5 in his pocket. He was not mad or angry, but he felt very sad. I walked right up to him, close, and talked as I would have talked to a client in hypnosis at the office. Then I turned around, took a few steps, turned back to him and said, "I'm impressed by you driving the huge truck around town." As soon as I said that last phrase, I found myself back on the white couch, still looking out of the panoramic windows at a white truck on the yard across the building. The driver ran back into the truck with a spring in his step and drove away. I smiled quietly, knowing what so many before me had discovered. My awareness was no longer limited to the immediacy of my physical body. I thought of a past life in France. I had already visited a few key events in that lifetime, but now I wondered what that man, after all, felt as he was dying. What the end was like that time around. My belly was huge. I laid on a small bed by myself. A friend sat close by. We talked periodically. I was sad. My wife had died several years earlier alone in a different country. I was a doctor and had immigrated to work with the understanding that I would hurry back to her. I got caught up in one issue after another, and by the time I came home, it was to dispose of her assets. She had already been dead. I felt sad that I never enjoyed her or the marriage. Work was all I ever thought about. Back on the white couch, I noticed that my ability to travel in space and time without my physical body was expanded and enhanced. A sense of relaxed freedom filled me with joy. I was able to discern a difference in the way I felt to me to exist, knowing that my awareness, experience, and presence were not tied to a physical body, knowing and experiencing that viscerally, produced the greatest sense of freedom and joy I have ever felt on this planet. Regressions and projections are not important. Freedom and joy are. You are important. I just told you the result of a series of experiences that I could not have imagined or created on my own. It was not always that way, however. In fact, come with me and I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you a very unlikely story, the true story of how I went from devastation to profound joy. I believe you will find your own freedom and joy as well as you embark on this adventure with me. So, what Frank Baler is saying here, when you begin reading that section, right, you don't know exactly, that's the beginning of the book. That's the first chapter of the book. It's called "And So It Came to Pass." And what he describes, and we've talked about this, he used to live in an apartment on the 5th floor of this building, the top of this building, and there were these large panoramic windows, floor-to-ceiling glass, and he had a white couch that faced that window, and he loved that place. He loved living at that place. In fact, one of the things that he loved to do was to sit on that couch at night with all the lights inside off, and he could see kind of the city in a sense, and there was a freeway to his left over here, It was a very beautiful place the way he describes it. So one afternoon, evidently after some of these experiences they were about to read about, he was sitting on that couch looking out of this window, and there was a road right across from the building there, and he saw this truck, and what he was able to do was what they call like an astral projection thing. He was able to go there and talk to the driver of the truck without his physical body. In other words, it was a projection. Now, we can all debate this. Did he really do a projection? The thing is that the man, the driver, came off of this truck and he was looking down. He felt ejected, right? And suddenly, this driver felt really happy, got back in the truck and drove away. Can we prove anything? Of course not. But Frank Baler seems to think, he's quite convinced, that he was able to travel to where that man was. He was able to talk to that man, and the word talk here appear under quotation marks. It wasn't a physical conversation, but he was able to transmit some ideas to this man in his astral body. And this driver felt excited again, got back on the truck and drove away. So for those of you who are into this idea of the mystical astral projections, that's what he's talking about. For those of you who are skeptical, I do invite you to continue being skeptical and listening to the book in detail. There's no proof of anything. The mystical path is not a scientific path. It's not a path of proofs. There's no laboratory. The only laboratory here is you. You may have some experiences if you work on producing them, if you work on yourself. If you develop yourself in that direction, you will have experiences that leave you with no doubt as to whether they're true or not true. The other experience that he describes is a regression to a past life in France. And what he was curious about was the end of their lifetime, the death, what we call the death, right? But mystics usually don't use the word death because there's really no death. We use the word transition because we transition out of the physical body into kind of a spiritual body in a sense, what we call the astral body, but then you go through a second death later, you go into this other body, and the soul is kind of in between lives, and eventually we have to come back and continue learning. So the question here was, what was it like to end that lifetime for Frank Baler? He wasn't called Frank Baler back then, obviously, but it's the same soul, the same person, the same entity, just in a different body in a different time. And it's really, really interesting. We're going to see that as we go through the book, we're going to see that he has this massive pain related to a marriage or to a relationship with a woman and children and 2 children. And in this lifetime, he loses that wife and children. I don't know that, he, in the complete novel, he talks about the children and so forth. And, it was a painful thing to him. And this is the thing, I've been a hypnotist since 1996 myself, just like Frank Baler. And we've done, thousands of regressions. And people call me up all the time and ask about regressions. And everybody's wondering if there were some kind of queen or king or something, in a past life. And I suppose there is that side to regressions as well. I suppose it can be entertaining, it can be affirming, it can be good to know some things about ourselves. But oftentimes we contemplate some pretty tough feelings. Like in this case, he immigrated to a different country. He was in France when he died. He was not born in France. He was born in a different country. He went to France to work. worked there for a while, but got caught up in a bunch of issues, one after another, delayed his stay. He was only supposed to be there for a couple of years, but he stayed beyond what was planned. And, back then there was no FaceTime, no WhatsApp, whatever. By the time he came home, there were letters, there was mail. Mail took forever, but there was mail. He would correspond with his wife, he knew what was happening. But, a letter, by the time you wrote a letter, you went out, person wrote back and sent it back. It might have been 2 months in some cases before you got a response, 1 month in some cases, So they corresponded, but by the time he actually found his way back home, she was dead already. In other words, many years had already passed, and she died. And so he had a couple of years with his wife. Then this calling, this mission, this assignment was handed to him. He took it. He went to France. It was only meant to be a couple of years, but he was there for many more years than that and never quite saw his wife again. Kind of a sad story, and it's interesting because we're going to see how that relates to his current life as Frank Baler, right? So I hope you're enjoying the book. We're going to continue reading more passages from the book, and I'm really, really happy that you're here with us. We'll continue to explain because people have been reading the book and they've been calling me and telling me, look, what do you think he meant here? What do you think he meant there? Because there are some passages that might be a little bit complex. And I asked Frank Baler about that. Why wouldn't you explain more those passages? He said, dude, if I were to explain those passages more, it would have been 400,000 words or more. It's too long. It would have been it's too much, So I wrote what I could. You do your part. You explain it to me, So he's kind of counting on me to make this more accessible in some ways, and I'm glad to cooperate. So it's really nice having you here. If you like this story, if you haven't gotten a copy of the book, get one. It's on Amazon. I believe the Kindle version is still free now. I'm not sure. I have to check it. But get a copy. Leave us a review on Amazon, a useful review if you would. And subscribe to the channel so that you get notification as to when the following videos are posted so that you can continue following through on the reading of the book. It's really nice having you here. Blessings.